And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection, I'm your host, Robert Pictou. Our show today comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Tsimshian people. Conservation involves making trade-offs, figuring out how much we can sacrifice to gain certain benefits while still keeping our productive potential and resource diversity intact. Some people view conservation differently than preservation, with preservationists focused on keeping areas of nature completely untouched without any kind of extraction. On today's Open Connection, we rejoin the Nation to Nation panel discussion, Outlook for the Forestry Sector.
So I think we all got into this industry because of our love of the outdoors. And I think that sensitive caribou habitat that I was talking about in the Prince George TSA, like we're very happy to find solutions to be able to recognize that it is sensitive habitat and not disturb the herd.
Yeah. Troy, thoughts on conservation and having a forest economy?
Well, it's getting back to working with the First Nations and management of the tenures within their traditional territories. The First Nations know they have their values. What habitat do we want to protect? What archaeological do we want to protect? What do we want to protect? But at the same time, just like you say, Mother Nature, she'll come in and burn it down if we don't do it right. But if we do it right and start pulling out fire hazard mitigation, and they'll make it a lot easier to, like if there's a forest fire, then we could go get our initial attack in there a lot quicker. Then there's less fuel to burn out there, and instead of having to rely on the water bombers to come in and save us, because I think we got pretty lucky this year. Like ourselves, there's a fire up by Calum Lake this year, and it was fortunate that there's water bombers in the area that just finished dealing with another fire, and they're able to action that one right away and get that one down. And if we had, because when we do the pull some fiber out of there, the roads are opened up, the infrastructure's in there, and it'll be easy to get an initial attack to protect that.
Yeah, and I think there's still a fire at Whitsett that's still burning up on the north side of that community still. As you drive down the highway, you still see it smoking up on top of the hill. So, Mother Nature will come along, and it's, you're a little bit wetter than Vanderhoof here. So our fires have gotten huge over the years. When I fought fire, a big fire was 250 hectares, and now we're dealing with 100,000 hectare fires. So they're wiping out just about anything that we want to keep as a value. You want to keep as a value. So we've got to prioritize that higher than maybe timber or whatever it is. But so Rick, your thoughts on that whole conservation side of things, because it's an important path forward to how we move this industry forward.
Yeah, and I think that there's a couple different levels you can talk about it at. So kind of one of the big things is, we looked at land use planning around what we call zoning and things like that. And in that zoning, it was like, you can't go here, you can go there, you still can't go there, you can't. So it was like, yes, no, yes. And ultimately what happens, as you just mentioned, is there's these areas that were no, and then they were like wiped by some disturbance, whether it was insects or fire or wind or anything like that. And now it's like, but you still have that area that's yours, that's no go, so we can still do our industrial stuff over here. Creates a conflict in the whole conversation. I think what we need to be looking at more is looking at the landscape, saying, what are our objectives? And if we can achieve those objectives, and economics, and which creates, jobs and taxes and funds for schools and education and all that kind of stuff, we need that into the mix. but as well, we need to also have, biodiversity and critical species and habitat and things like that. The more we can look at that mix and say the landscape we're allowed to shift on the landscape and play all across the landscape for our various things over time, that I think will change the whole land use and conservation discussion. And suddenly no area is off limits to development, but no area is clearly, set aside per se.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
The thing we're saying with this, managing forests involves planning, organizing, and carrying out activities to meet certain environmental, economic, and social objectives. It includes a variety of tasks focused on using and taking care of the forest sustainably, making sure they stay healthy and productive over time. Let us return to the conversation with Rick Brower.
Because when it goes away, we just need to always manage the values. So it's a conversation that needs to happen with everybody to do that. And then that's kind of like more the on the ground thing, and it comes back to that land use planning process. But at the very high end, we need to look at what we take from our forests. What are the products? And the products are water, the products are carbon, and the products are habitat. So we need to think about that. But as well, how can we turn our economic products into high value products? Because we can lower our footprint if we have a higher value product stream. Historically, we've always been hewers of wood, and we just turn logs into lumber, generally speaking, broad spectrum. Lumber and pulp are broad global commodities that have relatively low, as a commodity, have relatively low value. If we can start looking at how we can turn our forest products into high value things, critical minerals, wood vinegars, things like that become, for each log is way, way more valuable, then we don't need to log as much to get the same amount of income and value. And that allows us more flexibility on the landscape. So at least two types of approaches.
Yeah, I think we're, and just my observation, I think we're probably headed to that where it's government to government on the land base. So the First Nations governments are dealing with the provincial government under a new process called the Forest Landscape Level Planning Process, or FLP process. And they're trying to fund, provincial government's trying to fund these to get them out. And it'll be the nations and the provincial government designing what those values are. So those values may not be timber number one, and it might not be for a lot of the province. 46% of the land base in British Columbia is now in one of these pilot projects. Vanderhoof is not. I don't think Terrace is. So it's difficult to be on the outside looking in, because I believe in that process. Rick, if you've gone through the LRMP or the process back in the 90s, so did I. And I thought it was a good process. I like this process better because the nations will be involved from the beginning. They will have the say on what the values of the land are. But that's what industry needs. We need to know what the values are, and then we all can manage for the value around what the decision was between government to government. That's going to take some time. But then once it happens, then you come up with a forest operations plan map, and now you've got, Troy, you talked about this. There's no waiting for permits. There's none of that. It's because you've identified values. Right now, it seems like everyone, and I'm not knocking the government officials, everyone doesn't want to sign a permit off for whatever reason. There's a reluctance to do that, even though they've been, deputy ministers and groups have said, you got to make a decision, either yes or no, but not, I will defer it. We can't do that. So here we are in this situation. So I'm hoping that the FLP process in British Columbia is one that is a great process. Obviously, Terrace and Vanderhoof and other people don't have it, but Burns Lake has a great opportunity, and and I think Quesnel's got one too. So I don't know, Dennis, if you're involved in the province, you're all over the place. Have you seen any of this FLP process in either on the island or in the Northeast or in Prince George yet?
I haven't been exposed to that, no.
Yeah, so it's coming, and I think government to government will decide what the values are. Then the stakeholders like local government, logging contractors, bike groups, snowshoe groups, ski groups, they will all come to the table after the fact.
Just out of curiosity, what did you think of the provincial government's old growth strategy?
Well, I'm supposed to be asking the questions. Like I know Al Gorley and Gary Merkel pretty good, and they did a job. I'm going to go back from my point of view. Whatever value we decide to leave on the land base, and Vanderhoof and our forest district has a lot of polygons that are old growth, and they're nowhere like the beautiful trees you guys have here. These are trees that are going to be about that big, and sure, it's old growth, but Mother Nature is going to come and burn it, and it has already. And so Shane will tell you that. Shane Berg, the chief forester, will tell you that we're losing some of that stuff in that strategy already. So what do I think of it? I think it has a place. I think the 3-phase approach that Al Gorley would like to see implemented faster is the better approach. So it's you can go in and harvest around it, but we just can't defer huge chunks of land at this time.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. In British Columbia, getting the green light to export timber or logs involves a couple of steps. First off, you need to get an exception from the rule that says you have to use or make timber sourced from BC. After that, you'll want to apply for a provincial permit that lets you take the timber or logs out of the province. Finally, if you plan to send the timber or logs outside of Canada, you'll need to secure a federal permit. Let us return to the panel discussion with Dennis Callahan.
We don't actually sell the logs, though, as a logging company. It's the people that own the licenses that sell them. And I think there is a good portion of wood from Vancouver Island that goes overseas. I'm not as familiar with the Northwest, Troy, but I think there is quite a bit that leaves through Stewart too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something that's necessary for us right now, because back in 97, I believe, was when the Prince Rupert pulp mill shut down, and I can't remember the exact year Eurocan shut down, but now, as Rick stated earlier, it's the saw log that has to amortize all those costs. So to make stands profitable, we need a component of export, and trying to figure out the balance of that because that's one of the reasons Chief Roberts had the vision to buy that mill, because we want to produce our wood here. We want to keep our jobs here.
There's a lot of protectionism going on, and obviously the U.S. is a large part of our market. Shipping overseas export is still part of what we do. Dennis talked about Mosaic. Mosaic's a big chunk of private land down in Nanaimo on Vancouver Island. I've been there, looked at the operation. 40,000 cubic meters, I think, a month go out on a ship to Japan or China, one of the two. They're beautiful, clear Douglas fir logs. So as a person from the central interior, I'm going, how do I get that log from going to offshore? How do I get that log to make people work in our communities, right? And it used to be that the price was exorbitant that people were paying offshore for these logs. But I think what people are paying for wood now in the central interior is close enough that we should figure out how to do it. but we can't do that in isolation. Brian and Vanderhoof can't try to figure that out. We need Terrace and we need Burns Lake and Houston and all of those, and Nanaimo and Mosaic to figure that out. But we need to get, somebody had mentioned it earlier, we need to get everybody in the same at the same table, because the goal of the economy, and James Carville in 1992 quoted, "It's about the economy, stupid." That's what Bill Clinton's thing was. It's about the economy, stupid. And it is. It's about that. We're trying to make sure that the economy keeps going in all of our communities. But if we're always in isolation and we want our mill to last longer than your mill, then we're not getting to a point that we need to be. Exports are a big problem. And I don't mean that against anybody that's exporting, but it's also an opportunity that needs to be looked at for those that don't have wood in their area.
My name is Trevor Morrison. I'm the CEO of Lake Babine Nation. The forest industry, it's a big part of our community in Burns Lake. It's we're supporting our sawmills as much as we can. We're working with them on trying to bring more fiber to the sawmills. We have a number of band members that are employed with these sawmills, and looking at Fraser Lake, the sawmill shutting down there, and then the Plateau operations are going to be shutting down in the Vanderhoof area. So it's that my question is directed to you again, Brian. That you're our counselor for Vanderhoof. Like, what do you see? What does the future look like for your community members who are employed with the sawmill? I don't see much response or support from the local MLA, John Rustad. Again, somebody who is trying to rescind DRIPA.
Yeah.
But what is your guys' response as the municipality, and do you think First Nations again should be getting involved and looking at supporting the local forest industry?
I'm going to reverse that. I think we need to support First Nations in going forward. Trevor, you're at the table, government to government. We need to support you. The question that we need to ask as a local government is, where do local governments fit in your path forward?
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
A Community Forest Agreement, or CFA, is a forest license that's managed by local governments, community groups, First Nations, or a mix of these, all aimed at benefiting the whole community. Community forests create chances for activities like recreation, wildlife, and watershed management, helping communities whilst also boosting a more varied forest economy. In this final segment of Open Connection, let us return to the panel discussion with Brian Frankel.
Burns Lake, a big community forest. I do like what happened. David Eby and the Green Party both announced that they would increase community forests in size. You guys have a big portion of your quota is community forests. I think that's awesome. I think that that's the way it needs to go. But again, as Lake Babine and Vanderhoof, how do we support each other to push that message further that it needs to happen tomorrow? And we need to take that volume back and help each other, because at the end of the day, it's our communities. We all live in the communities, and we're all concerned about healthcare and education and all of those things. But we can't have it dictated from a corporate office in Vancouver, and we can't have it dictated to us by some new young professional forester in Victoria that's never had boots on the ground. So.
My name is Melanie Woods. I'm from the Galactamics Village Government. I just wanted to, while we're talking about forestry, I know it's, how do you say, we talk about practices. So one thing that, especially if you're having First Nations at the table, the consideration, because a lot of the times we hear just common practice, or, this is, usual as, normal. But one thing that we're seeing is when there's a clear cut, that when they're going to go reforest and they transplant, they'd use the lowest grade and I shouldn't say grade, species. So it's always just pine, but they don't have the full species. You're taking out the cedar. We don't see that being replanted back. We need to ensure that what you're taking out, you're putting back in. So I don't see that happening. But also the burn piles, those are heartbreaking for us to see, because we see what that fiber can be and what the potential. And yet when we go and ask to, for them, we're always told, no, it's specific. We can get charged if we end up going to use them. Yet you say you're at the table with First Nations, yet those communities can use that fibers and the wood. So just want to, but also on a cultural aspect is before somebody goes into, to cut, to take the wood, considerations for artists. There's cedar bark that can be taken. There's medicinal reasons, mushrooms that are there that we utilize. So how come those aren't put in? It's always just to whatever practice they choose to use. And it's not consideration of that, yes, we have First Nations within this territory. Have we taken that consideration? Because we do have a 5-year forestry plan. And when we're doing that in each of those steps, there should be those mechanisms built into place. Thank you.
This new FLP process, you will be in charge of that with the provincial government. It will not include me. It will not include Dennis or Rick. It won't. It's going to include government to government, and you will decide what those values are on the land base. And on the outside of that, stakeholders will come in and say, well, we'd like a bike trail, or we'd like whatever. But there will be value. But please remember, there is value not only there is value in timber because it is part of our economy, but you will be able to decide where that ranks. And that's coming pretty quick. And I hope it comes sooner than later.
It's like what Melody said, that it ties to one of my points, a message I like to leave. In BC, in general, we are blessed with ecologically diverse and ecologically resilient forests, which means our forests actually can handle a fair bit of change over time and things like that, which makes us a good place to carry out forestry activities, like industrial forestry activities, as long as it's balanced. So one of the things, like my core message is, in BC, we should be trying to grow out our industry and our concepts, because it's better to do it here than to push that demand into the Amazon, into Indonesia, and that kind of thing. That's where those forests are way, way, way more sensitive to single disturbances and things like that. So a core message just for all of us, and particularly Northwest BC, we have green, thriving forests that are ecologically resilient. So
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind and heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.